Why do fighters keep cutting weight even when they know it's a life-threatening move? Let's understand why. Not long ago, we saw Cameron Smotherman, a UFC fighter, weigh in and immediately after, collapse on stage. Medical staff came to his aid and, as expected, his fight was cancelled. After the incident, criticism arose about this method fighters use to lose weight, known as weight cutting. Smotherman's case isn't just a one-off failure, but rather part of a culture where fighters do extreme things 24-36 hours before a fight to reach their target weight. So let's understand why they do it, how dangerous it is, and how it can be prevented. Let's start with why they do it, and how it is that professional athletes don't maintain roughly the same weight throughout the season. First of all, the more weight a fighter has, the more power he has, both physically and simply because it means he has more muscle. In fights, even a small weight difference gives an advantage in power, and this is reflected not only physically but also mentally. Therefore, if you can weigh 70 kilos 2 days before the fight but weigh 72 during the fight itself, that's a significant advantage. The second reason is the built-in incentive of the system. When the weigh-in is the day before the fight, there's this window to create that weight manipulation and then return to your weight the next day. The third reason, or more accurately, the custom, stems from cultural pressure. In combat sports, it's known that pretty much everyone goes through this process, so if you don't do it, you're seen as a sucker. So if you don't cut weight, you assume that your opponent is coming in bigger than you and you're already entering the ring at a disadvantage. So how does this process actually happen? First of all, to understand weight loss, we need to realize that real weight loss happens over time through a process of caloric deficit. In other words, eating less than the amount of energy you expend. But here, that's not relevant. The cutting process is a manipulation involving fluids, salts, glycogen, and gut content. But what does that actually mean in practice? So first of all, the fluid part is expressed through excessive sweating and reducing fluid intake before fights, whether by using special suits, saunas, or any other method. The second thing is reducing the amount of sodium and carbohydrates simply by eating less of them. Stopping the consumption of carbohydrates lowers the body's glycogen levels, and each gram of glycogen holds 3 to 4 grams of water. In extreme cases, we've even heard of fighters who underwent colon cleansing to lose weight, to clear out the contents of their intestines. Ultimately, the danger of losing weight through dehydration is that yes, you weigh less, but you are much less biologically stable. Dehydration is accompanied by hypovolemia, meaning a decrease in the volume of blood in the body, in the amount of blood we have, and this comes together with an increase in osmolarity. In other words, the blood becomes thicker. In practice, this increase in thickness makes it harder for the heart to function, reduces the amount of blood reaching the brain, decreases the amount of oxygen delivered to the muscles, raises the risk of clotting, and makes it harder for the body to maintain its temperature. And after saying all that, perhaps the main victim is the urinary system and the kidneys. In dehydration, the kidneys receive less blood and therefore less oxygen. This leads to an accumulation of creatinine and urea, which can cause acute kidney failure in the short term and chronic ongoing damage to the kidneys in the long term. By the way, right after the weigh-in, the fighters rehydrate and replenish their salts, but they don't have enough time to fully recover before the fight, and many fighters go in when they're not at 100%. And by the way, none of this really reduces the damage. So how dangerous is this whole thing? Very dangerous, and we even have stories of fatal cases. One example is in 2013, when Leandro Feijão Souza died just a few hours before his scheduled weigh-in. So why does this whole thing keep happening? It's actually pretty simple. First of all, there's still a significant advantage to cutting weight. Secondly, the damage is usually long-term, so it's very easy to ignore it. Third, there are plenty of success stories of fighters who managed to get through it without any visible harm. So here are 4 quick ways to stop this practice, or at least reduce it. The first and perhaps simplest thing is to have another weigh-in right before the fight, along with some rule about the allowed difference between weigh-ins. The second thing is hydration tests. How much fluid is in the urine? And this already exists in one championship, the MMA championship. MMA in Asia. They do urine tests right before the weigh-ins, 24 to 48 hours before the fight. If you don't pass the hydration test, you simply don't get weighed and are disqualified. The third and more complex thing is simply having more weight categories. When there are large gaps between categories, it gives an incentive to drop down a category in order to be stronger in a lower weight class. If there are more categories, it solves this problem. The fourth and final thing is education. Learning about the dangers of dehydration, and I know it won't help a lot of people, but it's something. The bottom line that you need to understand is this: weight cutting is an incredibly dangerous and extreme physiological practice meant to gain an unfair advantage by trying to beat the system. But in the end, it places your entire physical body at a severe health risk, both in the short term and the long term as well. Please take good care of yourselves out there. Good luck to everyone.